Hey guys, tonight we're going back, way back, to a time when your bed was made of straw, your roof let the rain in, and your entire life was carefully supervised by the all-seeing eyes of the medieval church. You're not a knight, or a merchant, or a monk. You're a peasant. You're hungry, tired, unwashed, and your best friend is probably a goat named Albert who keeps eating your sandals. There's no Netflix, no pizza, no aspirin. And yes, spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stir under a thin wool blanket, itchy and slightly damp. The air inside the hut smells like smoke, earth, and something you don't want to identify. It's still dark out, but the rooster has opinions, and the rest of the animals are already stirring. You sit up, immediately regretting it, as your back protests like an old barn door. There's no mattress, just straw, and your breath clouds the air. Frost clings to the inside of the wooden walls. Welcome to rural life around the year 1250. You're one of millions of medieval peasants scattered across Europe, living in villages that rarely make it onto any map. Your home is a cruck house. Basically, two bent tree trunks leaning together, wattle and daub walls smeared with clay and dung, and a thatched roof that's more hole than hat. No chimney. The fire burns right on the earthen floor, and smoke gathers in the rafters before drifting out through the roof, or sometimes your lungs. You live with your entire family in one room. That includes your kids, your spouse, maybe a grandparent or two, and several barnyard animals who share floor space in the colder months. Privacy isn't a concept you understand. At night, you all huddle together for warmth. Romantic. Until someone sneezes and everyone gets the plague. Outside, the village is quiet, save for the crunch of frost under hooves. Your neighbors are already up, tending fires, milking goats, prepping for a hard day in the fields. You can't sleep in, not just because there's no such thing as sleeping in, but because your landlord expects your labor and the church expects your soul. The smell of burning peat seeps in. You start your day the way most peasants do, with a few cold scraps of yesterday's porridge and maybe a hunk of dark rye bread so dense it could double as a murder weapon. You chew slowly, feeling every grain grind against your molars. And above all this, beyond your hunger, your cold, your aching limbs, hangs the invisible pressure of God, not the cozy, golden-haloed God painted on cathedral ceilings. No, your God is strict, quiet, and constantly disappointed. He watches you work, suffer, and sin, especially sin. You are reminded daily that your suffering is earned. You are born sinful. That's the doctrine, a consequence of Adam and Eve's little fruit fiasco. You didn't ask to be born guilty, but here you are, paying for it with sore knees and bloody blisters. The village priest told you this last Sunday in Latin. You didn't understand a word, of course, but the tone made it clear. He spoke of humility, obedience, eternal judgment. You nodded along like everyone else, more out of habit than comprehension. Historians still argue whether most peasants truly believed these teachings, or simply went along because it was safer than asking questions. After all, what good comes from rebellion when your hands are too callous to hold a sword? Even your dreams aren't your own. Last night you dreamed of bread, thick, crusty, and warm, a feast. But this morning, it's back to scraping lard onto dry bread, and wondering if your youngest is coming down with something. Illness moves fast here, and medicine is mostly prayer and herbs. You once saw a man tie moldy cheese to his feet to draw out the fever. He died the next day. But hey, nice try. There's a crucifix above your door, charcoal drawings of saints on the wall. You whisper a quick prayer before stepping outside. Half to bless the day, half to protect yourself from whatever curses your superstitious neighbor might have sent your way. You don't trust her. She talks to cats, and she smiles too much. The church bell rings from across the fields, its dull, mournful toll bouncing off the mist. Even the air seems to sag under its weight. Church isn't just on Sundays. It marks births, marriages, deaths, harvests, eclipses, and anything remotely important. It's the beating heart of the village, slow, relentless, and impossible to ignore. And yet, you don't hate it. Not really. The church is where you get news, see your friends, and occasionally escape your landlord's taxes with some well-timed piety. It's also one of the only places with music, chanting voices rising in echoes, soft candlelight painting halos across the cold stone. You trudge to the edge of your tiny garden plot, eyes on the sky. You know how to read the clouds better than the priest reads his Bible. Rain's coming, again. You sigh and pick up your hoe. Fun fact, many medieval peasants had just 4 or 5 pieces of clothing, total. You're wearing 2 of them. 1 shirt, a tunic, and shoes made of stitched leather that haven't been dry since last Pentecost. But hey, at least you're not barefoot this week. You work the soil, aching arms in rhythm with the wind, and wonder, not for the first time, why God invented nettles. Your fingers sting. You whisper a curse. Then, reflexively, a prayer. You never know who's listening. You trudge up the slope toward the village church, boots squelching in the morning mud. It's Sunday. Again. Or maybe it's a saint's day, or a feast day. You've lost track. Time in your world doesn't move in months or weeks. It lurches from sermon to sermon like a tired ox dragging a wagon. The church looms at the top of the rise. Not some towering Gothic cathedral, mind you. Just a squat, weathered structure of stone and wood, patched with moss and age. The door creaks like it resents you, and the air inside smells like incense and mildew. Cold clings to the walls. You lower your head and step in, falling into place beside your neighbors on a rough-hewn bench. There's no cushion. You shift and wince. The priest is already up front, robes flowing like wet curtains. He's speaking Latin, again. And no, you don't speak Latin. No one does, except him and the books he reads from. Still, you sit in rapt silence, because that's what's expected. The sermon spills over you in a wave of strange words. Peccatoribus, Dominus, Caritate. You nod solemnly. The guy beside you is asleep. And yet you feel it, the rhythm, the pacing, the tone like a scolding father wrapped in velvet. You catch just enough from the occasional translation the priest offers between verses. You are a sinner. You were born wrong. The only way forward is obedience, repentance, endless prayer, and probably a donation if you can manage. You glance around. Half the villagers look bored. A few look scared. The children are picking their noses or playing with bits of straw on the floor. One woman is crying silently, clutching a wooden cross. Historians still argue whether these sermons actually reached the hearts of medieval peasants or simply passed over their heads like smoke from a torch. Was the fear of damnation genuine? Or just another form of social glue, binding everyone under a shared umbrella of guilt? You know better than to ask. Asking questions is dangerous. The priest raises a hand. Everyone stands. It's time for a hymn. You mumble along with the few Latin phrases you've memorized phonetically. You don't know what they mean. Something about mercy? Maybe judgment? Could be livestock for all you know. But you hum the tune with reverence, because music is rare and strangely comforting. The echoes bounce off the stone, and for a moment, it feels like you're part of something bigger, like maybe all the mud and cold and work has a point. Then the hymn ends, and reality returns like a slap. You kneel on the stone floor, knees screaming, and wait for the priest to drone on about Saint Someone who lived in a cave, ate moss, and didn't blink for 30 years out of love for God. It's hard not to laugh. You stifle it. Last time someone chuckled during a sermon, the priest called them out by name. Public shame, then penance. You remember watching them crawl up the aisle on their knees the next Sunday, blood trailing behind. That quieted the village for a while. And so you listen again as the priest talks about hell, fire, eternal torment. Apparently, your soul is constantly teetering on the edge of damnation. All it takes is one sinful thought, one impure dream, one grumble about your neighbor's turnip patch. The devil is always near, watching, waiting. Quirky side note. Some villagers believe demons hide in church rafters, clinging like black cats, whispering temptations during Mass. That creaking sound above might be a squirrel, might be Satan. No pressure. You glance toward the altar, where a massive crucifix looms. Christ hangs there, wooden and sorrowful. His ribs stick out. His eyes are closed in agony. You've seen this same image your whole life. It's meant to remind you of sacrifice, suffering, redemption. But mostly, it reminds you that being alive is supposed to hurt. The sermon finally winds down, like a cart grinding to a halt. The priest offers communion. You shuffle forward, mouth open, tongue out like a baby bird. A thin wafer is placed upon it. The body of Christ, you're told. It tastes like old flour and sanctified disappointment. You return to your seat, chew slowly, and wonder if this counts as breakfast. Outside, the sky is still gray. The wind has picked up, but no one leaves just yet. The priest has one more announcement. Someone in the next village has fallen ill. They need prayers, and maybe someone to bring holy water. Volunteers? Silence. Eventually, old Margot raises her hand. Of course she does. She believes the water cured her goat's limp. She's the village's unofficial expert on miraculous liquids. As you file out, you see the baptismal font by the door, greenish water covered in dust and flies. A baby was dunked in it last week. You remember the wailing. Probably not from sin, just the cold. You step back into the daylight, blinking. Church is over, but the guilt lingers like smoke on your clothes. It always does. You've been told your soul is like a cloth stained with sin, and no matter how much you scrub it, there's always one spot left. Always. Funny thing, despite the weight of the sermons, despite the warnings and the fire and brimstone routine, the village still gossips, still laughs, still steals a chicken here or there. You once saw the blacksmith skip Mass entirely to fix a plow. When the priest asked where he'd been, he said, "With God, he broke my axle." Everyone laughed, even the priest. Sometimes, you wonder if God's watching you specifically, or just the general vicinity. Either way, you say a quick prayer under your breath, just in case. You're back in your field now, hoe in hand, sweat stinging your eyes despite the chill in the air. The sun's risen fully, but you barely notice. It's hidden behind that thick northern haze that always smells like wet wool and unresolved complaints. And just when you're thinking about lunch, well, whatever scrap qualifies as lunch today, you remember the tithe collector is making his rounds. Ah yes, the holy tenth. You glance toward the cart trundling down the muddy path, a creaky contraption dragged by a donkey who seems just as over it as you are. Riding atop is Brother Emile, the church's tithe collector, perched like a crow on a fence post, all robes and judgment. He's smiling. You never trust the smile. The tithe is simple in theory. 1/10 of everything you own, grow, make, or steal. Okay, they say not to steal, but goes to the church. Not the local poor, not your hungry neighbors, to God's house. In theory, it's not just crops. It's your eggs, your honey, your cloth, your pigs. Yes, even that runty piglet you were hoping would fatten up in time for winter. 1/10 of it all. If you fish up 10 trout, 1 goes to the church. If you gather 100 onions, 10 go into a basket that disappears behind the altar. Historians still argue whether all of it really ended up in sacred use, or just padded a bishop's cellar. You remember last spring, when your harvest was so poor you had to hand over your wife's wool cloak instead. Brother Emile called it acceptable penance. She called it the coldest Lent in living memory. This isn't charity. This is taxation wrapped in incense. You wipe your brow and keep digging potatoes. Every few minutes you glance toward the path, praying Emile keeps rolling past. But no, your luck is broken. Just like that old barrel you were hoping to patch up this week. The cart lurches to a stop near your fence. Emile hops down with a practiced groan. He's not a cruel man, not exactly, but he does carry a very large ledger and a very small amount of patience. God's portion? He says, like you've forgotten. You nod. The sack you've set aside isn't large. Some turnips, a wedge of hard cheese, a small jar of honey your kids had been eyeing for weeks. Your stomach twists as you hand it over. He doesn't say thank you. He just ticks a box with a quill and climbs back on the cart. The donkey grunts. The wheels squeal. They're off to the next cottage. You sit for a moment, just breathing. It's not the tithe that hurts most. It's the timing. It always comes when you have the least. Right before winter, right after drought, just after your neighbor's goats broke into your cabbage patch. It's like the church has a sixth sense for peak inconvenience. Quirky tidbit. In some villages, peasants got creative with their offerings. One man was caught trying to tithe a pie made of tree bark and lard, hidden under a thin crust of actual apples. The priest was not amused. The man spent 3 weeks cleaning chamber pots to reflect on honesty. You shift, stand, stretch your back until it pops like kindling. Then you trudge to the edge of the field where your youngest daughter is gathering kindling. She's bundled in layers that still don't quite protect against the damp. You reach down and hand her a turnip, one not meant for the church. You wonder quietly how many years you'll be able to do this. Your father tithed his whole life. So did his father. So will your children, probably. And despite all those offerings, the church roof still leaks, and the candles are always just about to run out. Historians debate how much resentment really brewed in the peasant class over the tithe. Some argue it was seen as a sacred duty, an honor even. Others believe that deep bitterness ran just under the surface, never voiced aloud for fear of God's wrath or the priest's. You think it depends on the day. Later, when the sun dips low and the shadows stretch across your garden like lazy cats, you see a familiar figure hobbling toward your hut. It's Thomas, the miller. He's got gossip. "Did you hear?" he says, eyes wide. "The abbot's planning a second tithe before Christmas. Says it's for a new bell tower." You snort. "His old one not fancy enough?" "Apparently not." You shake your head. "What's he gonna ring? Our bones." You both laugh. Quietly, carefully. It's one of the few joys left. Mocking the church just enough to blow off steam, but not loud enough to draw attention. Later that night, after the kids are asleep and the fire has died down to glowing embers, you sit with your spouse in silence. You each nurse a wooden cup of something vaguely resembling ale, brewed from barley, rainwater, and the hope that it won't give you the runs. You talk softly, not just because of the children, but because walls are thin and rumors travel faster than plagues. You wonder aloud whether the church really needs all that food, all that wool, all that coin. You wonder what God thinks of Brother Emil's shiny boots. Your spouse shrugs. Maybe he's barefoot up there, waiting for a tithe of clouds. You both chuckle, a rare sound in the quiet night. But under the laughter, a seed of doubt takes root. You'd never say it aloud, not even in whispers, but some days it feels less like salvation and more like robbery with a crucifix. You lie back on your straw mat, eyes on the black ceiling beams overhead. Somewhere out there, the church bell tolls softly, calling no one in particular. You're at confession. Again. Kneeling on rough stone, knees already numb, you stare at the wooden screen that separates you from Father Ulrich. You don't see him, but you can smell the faint sting of incense, hear the creak as he shifts his weight, and feel the air change with each of his slow, deliberate breaths. "Confess," he says, like it's a divine commandment, like not confessing might make the roof cave in. You sigh quietly. What did you do this time? Nothing major. You stole an egg. You had unclean thoughts. You skipped prayer one evening because your son had a fever and your back felt like firewood. But you know how this goes. Any of those are enough. Even just a bad thought is fuel for eternal flames. So you begin, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." The words tumble out, familiar as your morning routine. You mumble through your misdeeds, careful to include a few mild ones, enough to seem pious, but not so many that you raise an eyebrow. The egg incident, yes. That thing you said under your breath when the cow kicked over the milk. That time you thought about skipping Mass but didn't. Father Ulrich listens. He's always listening. Then he speaks softly, with that practiced air of sorrowful authority. "For your penance, 3 Hail Marys, and help old Bruna fetch water from the stream for a week." You nod. You knew he'd assign a chore. He always does. But at least it's better than last time, when you had to fast on barley water for 2 days. You leave the booth and step outside, blinking into the cloudy light. The breeze carries the smell of wet grass and old wood. You feel lighter? Maybe. Or maybe it's just relief that the priest didn't mention that one dream you had last month. You wonder, as you walk, how he always seems to know the things you don't say aloud. Historians still argue whether medieval confession truly offered spiritual release for peasants, or if it merely functioned as psychological surveillance, keeping villagers docile through guilt and ritual. After all, if someone knows your secrets, you're far less likely to rebel. You reach the stream and see Bruna already struggling with her bucket. You sigh and take it from her. She grins toothlessly. "Bless you," she croaks. You smile back. It's not her fault. She's old, bent like a question mark, and thinks leeches cure everything. Later that day, while helping her carry the water, she tells you a story about how, years ago, a boy refused to confess, said he had nothing to say, thought he was innocent. The next day, Bruna says, his cow died. Day after that, his mother broke her hip. Week later, pfft, she makes a slicing motion across her throat. Coincidence, you mutter. She narrows her eyes. The priest said his pride offended the saints. You nod, but you're not so sure. The saints have a habit of being offended by anything short of martyrdom. Quirky detail. Some peasants believed that confessing your sins wasn't enough. You had to feel sorry deep down in your bones. One man reportedly confessed to stealing a neighbor's goose, but was punished anyway because he didn't look guilty enough. He had to wear a sackcloth robe and sleep outside the church for a fortnight. You finish helping Bruna and head back to your own hut, thoughts heavy. You pass the shrine to St. Wulfstan, just a wooden carving with a faded face and one missing hand. Someone's left a bundle of herbs at his feet. Maybe as thanks, maybe as a bribe. You say a quick prayer anyway. Can't hurt. Inside your hut, your spouse is stirring a pot over the fire. The smell is rooty, possibly edible. You sit down and talk about the day, the confession, Bruna's tales. You mention how strange it feels to spill your soul to a man who lives in better housing, eats better food, and doesn't plant a single seed. Your spouse nods. He says he suffers for our sins. You both fall silent for a moment. Do you think he really hears them? You ask. God, I mean? Your spouse shrugs. If he does, he's got a lot on his plate. There's laughter in that, but also resignation. You both know confession isn't optional. It's expected, required. The church says sin clings to the soul like soot on a chimney. You must clean it out regularly or risk divine fire. So you confess, again and again, every week, every holy day. Sometimes you confess things you might have done just to be safe. And sometimes, if you're feeling especially wicked, you confess your thoughts. Because in this world, thoughts matter. Thought crime didn't begin with Orwell. It began with men in robes and Latin phrases. You light a tallow candle and prepare for evening prayer. The kids mumble along, half asleep, fingers fumbling over the sign of the cross. You lead them through the Our Father. You're not sure who taught it to you, but it's as natural as breathing now. You glance at the tiny wooden cross hanging by the door. It's cracked, faint scorch marks around the edges, remnants of that fire last year. You kept it anyway. Something about it makes the room feel less hollow. You finish the prayer and settle in for the night. Another day done. Another round of sins forgiven, or at least postponed. You curl into the straw, thinking about tomorrow. You'll sin again. Not because you want to, but because surviving means cutting corners, and the church always has a corner to watch. The rooster hasn't even finished its first smug crow when you hear the bell toll. Not the big church bell. This one's smaller, higher pitched, rung by the sacristan with enthusiasm that borders on the obnoxious. Another holy day. You groan into your straw. Of course it is. You lose count of how many feast days, saint days, fast days, and holy obligations are scattered across the calendar. But the church hasn't. The church keeps meticulous track. You rise, joints cracking like twigs in frost. Your children are still curled in a knot under a thin blanket. Your spouse mumbles, "Which one is it today?" "Saint, something?" you offer, pulling on your tunic. "The one with the donkey and the glowing shoe, I think." The medieval church calendar is a sprawling masterpiece of interruption. Days when you can't work. Days when you must work. Days when you can't eat meat. Days when you can't eat anything fun. Days when you're supposed to weep. And days when you're allowed to smile, but not too much. You trudge outside. The path to the church is already busy. Neighbors shuffling, yawning, muttering about sore backs and unfinished chores. None of you want to be here exactly, but not showing up isn't really an option. Historians still argue whether peasants saw these feast days as burdens or blessings. On one hand, they meant time off the fields. On the other, they came with expectations, restrictions, rituals, and the looming threat of hellfire if you skipped one too many. You arrive and take your place. Today's sermon is longer than usual, thick with tales of Saint Whatever's miracles. Something about curing boils and predicting rain. You zone out around the part where a demon is banished into a well. When the final hymn ends, you file outside and head toward the village green. Today's a no-labor day, which sounds relaxing until you realize that also means no income, no harvesting, no selling at market, no repairs to your fence that's currently leaning like a drunk pilgrim. You sit on a log beside your friend Oswin, who's whittling a spoon like it owes him money. "Third feast day this fortnight," he grumbles. "What are we celebrating this time?" "Saint Gervais, I think." Oswin frowns. "Who?" "Exactly." He spits into the grass and goes back to carving. Still, there's a strange comfort to it all. The rhythm, the predictability. You might not know what year it is. Nobody does, but you know what day it is. Candlemas, Ascension, Feast of the Assumption. The church tells time for you in incense and bells and barley loaves. You remember Lent last year, 40 days of fasting, broken only by Sundays and the occasional loophole meal that someone claimed technically didn't count as meat. Your stomach was hollow, your head fuzzy, but your soul, supposedly squeaky clean. And then there's Advent, when the nights grow long and cold, and you're expected to wait patiently for divine joy. You light candles, you sing. You try not to think about your dwindling food stores or the goat's suspicious cough. Quirky detail. Some feast days were marked by plays, mystery dramas performed on wagons that rolled through town. You once saw a man dressed as God lower himself from a hayloft using a pulley. The rope snapped. The crowd gasped. He landed in a pig trough. No one knew whether to laugh or pray. You spend most of the day doing nothing in particular. It's a holy nothing, though, sanctioned by Scripture. You mend a bit of netting. Chat with the baker about his sourdough starter. Gossip lightly about who gave side-eye to whom during communion. Later, when the sun is low and the kids are chasing each other through the muck, you sit with your spouse and share a heel of bread and a hunk of aged cheese. It's the nicest meal you've had all week. The kids are giggling. The air smells like peat smoke and trampled grass. The church may control your time, but it hasn't yet crushed your small joys. Still, it's exhausting, trying to keep track of what's allowed when. Is today a meat day? A wine day? A don't blink or you'll sin day? You once saw a neighbor get a tongue lashing for dancing on St. Barbara's Day. Apparently, she disapproves of joy. You lie awake that night, stomach full for once, eyes tracing the flickering shadows of the firelight. Tomorrow, It's back to work, back to labor, blisters, and calculating whether you have enough barley to last through to Michaelmas. But today, you rested, sort of. Under the all-seeing eye of the church calendar, you paused, you obeyed, you endured. You mutter a prayer before sleep, just in case. Morning again, but this one feels different. Your breath puffs in the chilly air as you wrap your cloak tighter around your shoulders, stepping outside with your usual mixture of dread and routine. The frost on the ground sparkles under the low sun. It should be beautiful, but all you can think about is the bruise on your heel from yesterday's church-ordered rest. You're sore from not working. Funny, isn't it? You limp your way over to the barn, if you can call it that, and check on the livestock. 2 chickens, one with a crooked leg, a cow that gives milk about as willingly as a bishop gives tax breaks. And the goat. Oh, the goat. Albert, you swear, is the incarnation of one of Satan's lesser demons. You toss some grain and duck back inside, because today you have something else to do. Something that requires pain. It's penance day. You don't mean basic confession. No, this one's special. Big sin. Bigger punishment. You're not even sure what tipped the scales. Maybe that time you cursed the sky when it rained. Maybe the time you dreamt about the neighbor's daughter. Whatever it was, Father Ulrich pulled you aside last week and said, very gravely, "Your soul is heavy. It must be lifted." Which apparently means a pilgrimage to the shrine down the hill. Barefoot. You groan and start unlacing your boots. The path is muddy, pebbled, and cruel. Each step is a small betrayal. Your toes go numb. Your soles sting. And yet, you keep walking. Why? Because they told you this will cleanse you, that this will bring favor, that this misery is good for you. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants actually found spiritual meaning in these acts or simply endured them out of fear and habit. Was the pain uplifting, or just another way to break the body while pretending to save the soul? You're too busy watching for thorns to think about that. At the shrine, a small wooden box stands beneath a painted icon of Saint Agnes, who was apparently beheaded for not marrying a pagan nobleman. Inspiring. You kneel, lips pressed to the frozen ground, and whisper a prayer. You ask for strength, for forgiveness, for warmer feet. And then you do it. You reach into your pouch, pull out a small twig, and begin to lash your own back. Gently, at first, then harder. This is flagellation, self-punishment. A whip made of braided cord or flexible branches, sometimes even embedded with little bones or nails. Yours is just wood, but it stings, and you wince, you grit your teeth, you carry on. Because suffering is sacred. At least, that's what they say. You remember a tale from last winter. A man in the next village walked a mile with a stone in each shoe to atone for his pride. Another laid face down in snow for an hour, praying aloud. That one lost 3 toes, but everyone agreed. His soul was lighter. Quirky detail? One bishop once claimed that laughing too loudly was a sin requiring a day of silence and diet of raw peas. You tried it once. Turns out peas are terrible conversationalists. You rise, aching, and head home. Your feet leave bloody prints on the frost-bitten dirt. Your children run to greet you, but stop short, eyes wide. Your spouse helps you inside without asking questions. There's a strange peace in your bones. Or maybe it's just shock. You lie on your side near the fire, and they bring you a warm rag, a little broth. For once, no one argues. No one mentions the missing cheese you forgot to tithe last week. Today, you've earned your silence. You doze off thinking about penance, about how it teaches you that pain is purification, that hunger and hurt are the truest form of worship, that the body must be punished because the soul cannot be trusted. Historians note that some peasants took this to extremes, fasting for weeks, starving themselves near to death, crawling miles to holy wells, hoping for visions, or at least for someone to notice. You never had a vision, but you once hallucinated that Albert the goat was glowing. You decided not to tell anyone. That night, wrapped in your tattered blanket, the ache radiating from your spine, you feel something close to clarity. Maybe it's spiritual. Maybe it's blood loss. Either way, you sleep harder than you have in weeks. The wind howls tonight, slipping through the cracks in the walls like a thief with cold fingers. You sit close to the fire, listening to it moan through the trees. Outside, something creaks. Maybe the well bucket, maybe something worse. Your children are asleep, curled up like kittens beneath their cloaks. Your spouse is patching a tunic with sore fingers and a bent needle. You pretend not to notice the quiet fear in the room, because there were whispers today. Not the usual gossip about whose sheep wandered where, or whether the new acolyte smells like onions. No, real whispers. Dangerous ones. Someone in the next village has gone missing. They say he questioned the priest, said the church had no right to take his grain when his baby had just died, said maybe God didn't care, said maybe, this wasn't how faith was meant to work. And then, just like that, gone. You poke the fire, watching sparks jump. You feel a cold coil in your belly. It's not the missing man that frightens you. It's the silence around his name. No one asks, no one protests, no one dares. You've seen this before. When you were young, a woman named Lydia stopped going to Mass, said she preferred to pray by the stream, said the water felt holier than the church floor. She smiled too much, wore strange herbs around her neck. They found her hut empty one morning, just an open door and a candle still burning. Historians still argue whether heretics were common in peasant communities, or if accusations were just tools for silencing the eccentric, the stubborn, or the unlucky. It's hard to separate real dissent from superstition when the punishment is the same either way. You know better than to speak your mind. At supper, you tell your kids an old tale about a saint who preached to birds and slept on rocks. You keep your voice low and soothing, not just because they're falling asleep, but because you know they're listening. Not the kids, the others. The priest walks the village path every evening now, holding a lantern and murmuring prayers. He says he's blessing the homes. You wonder if he's also counting them. You whisper a short prayer as you tuck in your children, not for their safety, though you want that, but for their silence, that they'll know what not to say, what not to ask. Quirky belief? Some say heretics are marked by strange dreams. If you see fire in your sleep too often, best keep it to yourself. And if a neighbor starts dreaming of animals that talk, saints that glow, or dark figures whispering from behind trees, the safest response is a firm nod and immediate change of subject. You dream that night of a man made of ash standing in your doorway, pointing toward the church with a handful of bees. You wake sweating. You don't tell anyone. The next morning, you walk to the well and spot Father Ulrich talking to a group of villagers. His voice is calm, but there's steel under it. Anyone who hears blasphemy, he says, must report it. It's your duty. To the church. To your soul. You nod along with everyone else. Your face is a mask. Behind it, you feel your thoughts folding inward, tucking themselves into the softest corners of your brain where no one can reach. Historians suggest that medieval villages often policed themselves, driven by both faith and fear. The church didn't need soldiers. It had you, your neighbors, your own whispering conscience. You meet Oswin by the stream that afternoon. He's unusually quiet. Do you think he's really gone? You ask. Oswin looks at you sharply. Who? You hesitate. The one from Nork's Hill. He shrugs. Never heard of him. That's the answer you both give. That's the answer everyone gives. Later, you see old Bruna leaving a bundle of herbs at the chapel door. Not flowers, not food, herbs that don't grow in the church garden. You wonder if they're meant for healing or hiding. You say nothing. Night falls again, fast and heavy. No stars, no moon. You bolt the door and place the wooden cross on the table, more out of habit than hope. You kneel beside your children and murmur prayers, careful not to improvise, not to stray, not even a little. Because in this world, faith is a straight path, and the shadows on either side are full of watching eyes. You're packing bread into a cloth bundle, stale but still edible, and threading it onto your belt. Your spouse is watching you with a face that says both worry and resignation. The kids are still asleep. You leave quietly, careful not to wake them. Today, you begin a pilgrimage. Not because you want to, not because it sounds fun, but because the priest said your family's bad luck, the boils, the sickly sheep, the miscarriage last spring, might be signs. Not from God exactly, but from his absence. You've been too sinful, too lukewarm. And what better way to warm your soul than a journey to the bones of a saint? The shrine is 70 miles away. Barefoot, you tighten your cloak and step into the pre-dawn mist. You are not alone. Pilgrimage isn't rare. In fact, the priest said it's a blessing to suffer on the road. The more blisters, the better. Pain equals progress. And if you die before returning, even better, straight shot to paradise. Historians still debate whether peasants truly believed in the miracle power of relics, or were simply swept up in a system where hope clung to splinters of wood and mummified toes. But here you are, walking through mud to touch a saint's knuckle. You pass through woods that creak and shiver. Birds call out overhead, but otherwise the world is quiet, like it's holding its breath. You don't bring a weapon. Pilgrims aren't supposed to. You trust in God. Also, you couldn't afford a sword, even if you wanted one. You stop at a village halfway there. A stranger offers you a bowl of thin pottage in exchange for prayer. You recite the Our Father with such devotion they offer seconds. You resist the urge to lick the bowl. At night, you sleep on the side of the road. A tree root digs into your spine. The stars above blink coldly, like they know how ridiculous this all is. The next morning, your heel splits open. You keep walking. Eventually, you reach the shrine, a squat stone chapel nestled beside a creek. A carved statue of Saint Floribert watches from above the door, face chiseled in permanent sympathy. You limp inside. The air smells of wax and mildew. The priest there doesn't ask your name, just gestures to the relic, a silver box said to contain Floribert's fingerbone. You kneel. You pray. You press your forehead to the reliquary. And that's it. No thunder, no vision, no heavenly choir. just the soft rustle of someone else sobbing in the corner and the creak of wood as the chapel settles into its silence. Still, something shifts inside you. Maybe relief, maybe hunger. You light a candle. You leave an offering, 2 of your last coins. Then, you step back out into the wind. Quirky tradition? Some pilgrims would bring home water or soil from the shrine, believing it held power. You scoop a little dirt into a scrap of cloth, not because you believe exactly, but because everyone else does. You start the long walk home. Your feet throb, your back aches. A dog follows you for a few miles and then disappears. You think you see someone in the trees once, but when you blink, they're gone. You don't sleep well, but you dream vividly. In one dream, St. Floribert himself hands you a bowl of stew and says, "You forgot the salt." You wake up confused and extremely hungry. When you finally return to your village, no one claps. No one gasps in awe. Your children hug you. Your spouse weeps quietly. And Father Ulrich simply nods, hands you a blessing, and tells you to get some rest. But the next Sunday, he mentions your pilgrimage in his sermon. An example of true devotion, he says, even from those among us with the least. You blink. That's you. The least. You sit up a little straighter on your wooden bench. Maybe your bad luck will ease. Maybe the sheep will stop coughing. Maybe the rot in the wheat will recede. Or maybe nothing changes at all. But either way, you've paid the toll. You've walked the miles. You've bled on the road. You've done your part. You feel lighter. Or maybe you're just dizzy from dehydration. There's a stillness in the air today. Not peaceful, heavy. You stand in your garden, hands resting on the handle of your hoe, eyes fixed on the low gray clouds dragging their bellies over the treetops. You've seen this before, the way everything quiets, the way even the birds stop chirping. Someone has died. You don't need a bell to tell you, though it rings anyway, long and slow. The morning toll. You drop your tool and make your way toward the chapel, feet dragging through wet soil. The whole village is gathering, drawn like moths toward grief. Funerals are communal affairs. Everyone attends, not out of courtesy, but obligation and fear. Death is catching after all. It's polite to pretend it's not. The body lies in a simple wooden coffin, barely smoothed, the lid still ajar. You glance inside, pale face, hands folded over the chest, a coin on the tongue, standard fare. The coin is for Karen, even though that's not technically church doctrine anymore. Old traditions die hard. Father Ulrich stands at the altar, somber as always, robes billowing in the draft. He begins the funeral mass in Latin. None of you understand it, but it feels sacred, which is almost the same. You bow your head. You think of the body, how it was just a person yesterday, laughing, coughing, walking down the lane with a basket of turnips, now still, wrapped in a shroud and prayers, waiting to be lowered into earth. Your own death feels closer suddenly, not because you're sick, but because it's always close. The church reminds you often, life is short, death is final, heaven is possible, but only if your debts are paid in full. And the biggest debt? Purgatory. That spiritual waiting room for souls not damned, but not pure enough for paradise either. A smoky, eternal limbo where you burn off your leftover sins like old stains scrubbed in holy lye. And guess who helps with that? You do. You pray for the dead. You light candles for them. You donate on their behalf. Because the more you pray, the quicker they rise. The church says so, and if you don't, they linger. Historians still debate whether purgatory was a comfort or a curse for medieval peasants. On one hand, it gave hope. On the other, it meant even death didn't free you. There was always more to pay. After the sermon, the coffin is carried out. 6 men shoulder it, feet slipping in the wet grass. The grave has been dug near the chapel, under a gnarled tree that drops its leaves like tears. You help toss the first clump of dirt. It lands with a dull thud. Then you kneel. Everyone does. You clasp your hands and begin the prayers, not just for the deceased, but for your own soul. This moment is a reminder. One day, this will be you. And if your debts aren't cleared, if your confessions weren't sincere, your penance incomplete, then purgatory awaits. You light a candle in the chapel after the burial. It's small, stubby, barely clinging to life, like most people here. Quirky tidbit? Some villagers believe the dead hang around for 3 days after death. Linger in corners, whisper through cracks. That's why you leave the windows open and pour a little water near the door, so they don't get stuck inside. You go home and hug your children. You whisper a prayer over each one while they sleep, just in case. That night, you dream of the grave, but not with fear. You see flowers blooming on the mound. You see the dead smiling, waving, whole. You see them surrounded by light. And then, just as you reach out, smoke. You wake up coughing. The fire has burned low. The smoke clings to the rafters like spirits. You lie back down thinking not of death, but of what comes after. The church promises salvation. Eventually, if you follow every rule, if you pay every toll, if you suffer with grace, you're doing your best. Whether it's enough, only God knows. You're washing linens in the stream, hands raw from the cold, when you overhear 2 women talking about sin. Not the ordinary kind, not pride or sloth or whatever gluttony looks like when you're rationing turnips. No, they're whispering about lust. You stiffen. You weren't eavesdropping exactly, but they're not being quiet either. One is giggling behind her hand. The other is more serious, almost fearful. They say even married folk can sin that way, she mutters. You blink. Married folk. You wring out a rag and ponder that. Because yes, you've heard the church's stance on carnal things. Often, loudly, from men who probably haven't touched anyone since they were old enough to grow a beard. But it still surprises you every time. The body is suspect, the flesh is weak. Desire is a crack in your soul where the devil slips in with muddy boots. Even in marriage, there are rules. The church says your bedroom has its own theology, purpose only, no pleasure, and God help you if you enjoy it too much. You wonder if God was watching last week. You hope he had the decency to look away. Historians still debate how strictly medieval peasants followed these teachings. Some suggest church rules about sexuality were mostly ignored or interpreted creatively. Others argue that guilt ran deep, shaping generations of shame and silence. You stand and stretch your back, the cold water dripping from your sleeves. You look around to make sure no one's watching. Then, with the smallest smirk, you think, if the devil invented pleasure, he was at least good at it. You say a quick Hail Mary in your head, just in case. That evening, you and your spouse share bread and broth. The fire is low. The kids are finally asleep. You sit close, not touching, but your knees brush once or twice. You don't speak of it. You just let the warmth bloom quietly. You think about how intimacy becomes rebellion when the church tries to regulate your size. You think about how even joy can be punished. Quirky historical belief. Some monks claimed that lustful dreams were the work of nocturnal demons called incubi. There were even instructions for exercising bedsheets. You don't know about demons, but you do know your straw mattress creaks too much to hide anything. You ask your spouse later, in a whisper, "Do you think it's a sin? Us?" They smile, tired but sure. If it is, I'll confess with a smile. The next morning, Father Ulrich delivers a sermon about chastity. He speaks of Saint Aelred, who lived 30 years without touching another person. He praises purity like it's the gold standard of sainthood. You try not to roll your eyes. You remember old Bruno once saying, "If the Lord made figs sweet, he meant them to be eaten." You liked that. Still, guilt lingers like smoke. You say extra prayers that night, not because you feel wicked, but because you've been trained to expect punishment after happiness. You wonder what God thinks about that. You walk through the village the next day and hear a couple arguing in hushed tones. She's pregnant. He's worried. Not about the baby, about when it was conceived. Not during Lent, surely. That would make it doubly sinful. The church's calendar dictates even your passion. Advent, Lent, Ember Days, feast days of major saints. Best to avoid them all. Which, come to think of it, leaves maybe 12 acceptable days a year. Maybe 13 if Saint Gervais is feeling generous. Historians note that even confession had its limits. Priests weren't supposed to ask too many specifics, but everyone knew they did. One woman in your village confessed last year and came out pale as flour. The next week, her husband was sent on a solo pilgrimage. People talk. You head to the fields, breathing deeply. The air smells of thawing dirt and distant manure. Honest sense, grounded. Unlike sin, which is slippery and vague, and shifts its shape to match the nearest sermon. You mutter under your breath, "If love is wrong, why does it warm my bones better than prayer?" Then you glance up at the sky, just in case he's listening. You're at the well, drawing up the bucket with a groan and a prayer, when you hear the shouting. Not the angry kind. No one's fighting. It's urgent, frantic, a rising chorus of gasps and oaths. You abandon the bucket and jog toward the noise, heart already knotted in your chest. You round the corner and see the crowd, villagers circling around something, or someone. At the center stands old Magda. She's barefoot, hair wild, dress torn at the hem. She's holding a dead chicken by the neck. It swings limply in her hand like a prop in a bad play. She looks confused, eyes darting. Her lips move, but you can't hear what she's saying. "She cursed it," someone whispers near you. "No, she touched it yesterday. I saw her. The bird was fine before that. She's been leaving ash piles on her doorstep again. Saints preserve us." Your stomach sinks. You know this tone. It's the same one used for wolves, snakes, and things that must be killed before they bite. They think she's a witch. Magda's always been odd, lived alone on the edge of the woods, talks to her cat, wears dried flowers in her hair, knows when someone's about to get sick. Once, she rubbed sap on your wrist when it was swollen and the pain faded by morning. You never forgot that. But now she's prey. The priest arrives, breathless, eyes scanning the crowd. He holds up a hand. "We must proceed carefully," he says. which everyone knows means proceed very, very carefully, but proceed. Historians still argue how often peasants actually believed in witches versus how much of it was scapegoating in times of stress, bad harvests, illness, unexplained death. Blame was a balm. Witchcraft was just fear, dressed in herbs and long silences. You step back, pretending not to see the way they pull her toward the chapel. They won't hurt her, yet, but she'll be questioned, examined, maybe forced to confess. They'll look for marks on her skin, places untouched by pain. They'll ask if she dreams of wolves or flies, or dancing in the woods with the devil. You know Magda. She'll confess if they push hard enough. Anyone would. Quirky belief? Some villagers think witches can steal milk from cows just by walking past and muttering. Others swear that a woman who carries a toad in her apron can make a man's crops wither overnight. You once heard someone say that if a woman looks you in the eye while holding a comb, your beard will fall out by next full moon. None of this makes sense, but when people are afraid, sense isn't invited to the discussion. You return home and find your children playing near the hearth. Your youngest is humming a nonsense tune Magda taught them. You hush them, gently but firmly, and steer them toward chores. Later, as the sky darkens, you hear that Magda's been told to fast for 3 days and pray constantly. She's to stay inside her hut. If anything else goes wrong in the village this week, a dead cow, spoiled meat, even a child's fever, it won't end there. You sit by the fire, turning a turnip slowly in your hands. Your spouse breaks the silence. She helped me once, when I couldn't stop coughing, gave me boiled nettle and bark. It worked. You nod. She gave me vinegar with cloves for a toothache. She doesn't deserve this. Doesn't matter. That's the truth. Innocence isn't protection. Piety isn't a shield. All it takes is suspicion and a bad week. You think about the church's teachings, how women are more easily swayed by temptation, how Eve opened the door to sin, how the devil finds his handmaidens among the poor, the strange, the unloved. And you wonder, does faith sharpen mercy or dull it? You step outside before bed, eyes scanning the woods. Somewhere out there, Magda's hut glows faintly through the trees. You whisper a quick prayer for her and one for yourself. It's raining again, a slow, sour drizzle that makes the ground soggy and your spirits soggier. You're ankle deep in mud, hauling stones for the Lord's newest granary, because when you're a peasant, your free time is generously donated to the upper class. Your arms ache, your boots slosh, and the steward overseeing the work watches from under a fine wool cloak. He's got gloves. You've got blisters. The church says this is right. Not the blisters exactly, but the order of things. You are a laborer, born to serve. Your suffering on earth is preparation for the paradise that might await you, if you behave, if you pay your tithes, if you confess with the proper ratio of guilt to tears. Meanwhile, the Lord rides past on a glossy mare, robes dry, boots clean, gold hanging from his belt like fruit you'll never reach. He nods at you. You nod back. Then you return to your stone. You hear the church say often that God judges the soul, not the status. That in heaven, kings and peasants kneel side by side. But down here, you kneel alone, and the king's knees are usually on cushions. Historians still argue whether peasants truly believed in the justice of the afterlife or simply clung to it, because the alternative, an endless cycle of suffering with no reward, was too cruel to accept. You try not to think too hard about it. That night, you sit by the fire with your spouse and count the few coins you've saved. You need more cloth for winter, a new blade for the scythe, maybe a pair of shoes for the oldest child. But then the church sends word, another collection for the poor of Jerusalem. You sigh and drop 2 pennies into the basket next morning. It's not optional. And yet, your priest's cloak looks newer each month. Justice feels slippery these days. Quirky tale. There's an old story of a peasant who asked a traveling friar, "If God loves the poor, why did he make me one?" The friar replied, "To teach the rich humility." The peasant laughed. Then he died of frostbite 2 weeks later. You walk through the village and pass the manor house. Stone walls, glass windows, a chimney that's always smoking with something roasting inside. The Lord's dog eats better than you do, but you don't curse him aloud. You just nod again, bow slightly, and hope he doesn't notice your cracked boots. You remember the priest's sermon last month. To envy the rich is to doubt God's plan. He said this while sipping from a silver cup. Your neighbor Oswin muttered, "I doubt God's plan includes mildew in my soup." You both laughed, quietly. But deep down, you feel the injustice. You work until your back screams. You bleed in the fields. And when a cart crushes your foot or you cough blood, no one comes running with a poultice. Not unless you can pay. You've heard rumors of friars who preach in the towns. Radicals who say that God cares more about justice than tithes, who question the wealth of bishops. You wonder how long they live. You pass a statue of the Virgin Mary in the chapel courtyard. She looks sad, always. You light a candle, not for yourself, but for your children, that they might live in a world where their worth isn't measured in grain sacks and obedience. Later, as you prepare for bed, your spouse speaks softly. Do you think it's fair that we suffer now for a reward we'll never see? You don't answer at first. You just stare into the coals. "I think," you say slowly, "that someone has to carry the pain, and the ones who decide that usually don't carry anything." You kiss their forehead. Pull the blanket up over your kids. Say a prayer. Not because you think heaven owes you, but because it's the only place where fairness still feels possible. You wake to shouting. Not angry, not fearful, ecstatic. Half the village is already out in the lane, some barefoot, some with their aprons still dusted in flour. You hear the word miracle before your boots even hit the ground. You shuffle outside, blinking against the morning sun, which for once isn't hidden behind clouds. A crowd has gathered near the pigsty behind old Bruna's cottage. This already smells suspicious. You squeeze through the throng, and there, standing beside a pen of squealing hogs, is a boy, maybe 10 years old, cheeks flushed, eyes wide. He's pointing, shaking, and beside him, in the mud, is, well, something. It looks like a lump of glowing white cloth, just sitting there, untouched, in the filth. "She saw an angel," the boy shouts, voice cracking. "It floated right there. It spoke." The crowd murmurs. Several cross themselves. Someone faints. Bruna just stares at the glowing lump and mutters, "That was my washing." You lean closer. It's a linen shift, hung to dry on a stick. The sun hit it just right through the trees. The fog made it shimmer. The pig knocked over a bucket. The boy panicked. And just like that, divine visitation. You say nothing. Historians still argue whether these village miracles were truly believed or served more as release valves for stress, hunger, and fear. When life grinds you down, The idea of something magical, something holy, can light up the dark like a candle in a cave. The priest arrives breathless. He inspects the scene, squints at the linen, looks at the boy, then he smiles. The Lord sends signs to the meek. And just like that, it's official, a miracle. By mid-afternoon, someone's already carved a crude wooden plaque. Site of angelic visit, year of our Lord. Whatever year it is, no one really knows. That night, people gather around the sty to pray. Someone starts singing. You join in, not because you believe an angel hovered over pig droppings, but because something in your heart wants it to be true. Quirky detail? Some peasants believed angels could be summoned by chanting the Lord's Prayer backward. Others thought if you saw one, you had to stay silent for 3 days, or you'd burst into flames. You try not to laugh at that last one. But also, you haven't said much today, just in case. The next day, a woman says she saw St. Michael in the clouds above the granary. The day after that, a man claims he felt a hand on his shoulder while praying. No one was there. It spreads, and for a brief, bizarre window of time, your village becomes a holy place. Pilgrims arrive, real ones, from the next parish, then from the hills beyond. They bring offerings, bread, cloth, even coin. The priest is overwhelmed. He blesses everyone who asks, starts talking about expanding the chapel. You help build a second bench for seating. Part of you knows it's ridiculous. The linen wasn't glowing. The voice was probably the wind through the slats. The boy might have just been dizzy from skipping breakfast. But another part, the part that aches, the part that's tired, wants it to be true. Because for once, everyone is smiling, singing, eating better, even laughing. And if all it took was a misinterpreted laundry day to lift the fog from your souls, well, what's so wrong with that? You remember a tale Father Ulrich once told about a man who saw the Virgin Mary in a loaf of bread. She apparently told him to stop swearing. He did, for a week. You fall asleep that night with the scent of candles on your skin and the sound of distant hymns in your ears. You dream that the angel visits you this time, not in the pigsty, but in your field. She says nothing, just looks at you with eyes full of sky. You wake up crying. No idea why. But you thank her anyway. You're back in the chapel, feet cold on the flagstones, watching Father Ulrich cradle a book as though it were made of gold. It might as well be. The Bible is chained to the pulpit, not metaphorically, literally. Thick iron links loop through a ring bolted to the lectern, fastening the great volume like a prisoner. You squint, trying to catch a word. But of course you can't. It's in Latin, all of it. Written in ink so faded it might as well be starlight. You've never read a word of scripture in your life, and you never will, because you can't read. No one in the village can, save the priest and the steward, and maybe the reeve who once claimed he could read his name, but stumbled halfway through spelling Amen. The church says knowledge is sacred, too sacred for common mouths. The Bible is a holy relic, not a bedtime story. If you want to know what God said, you listen. You never ask to see the words for yourself. Historians still argue how much this affected religious understanding among peasants. Was the system designed to preserve mystery and prevent questions? Or was it simply a relic of a time when parchment was precious and teachers scarce? You don't know. You just know that every story you've ever heard about Jesus, Mary, or any of the saints has come from someone else's mouth, passed down like bread, chewed once before it reaches you. You sit through the sermon as Father Ulrich reads from the Gospel of Luke, or at least says he does. He could be reciting a recipe for cheese pudding, and you'd never know. The candles flicker. You nod along. Afterward, in the yard, Oswin mutters, "Would be nice to know what God actually said, wouldn't it?" You glance around, then elbow him sharply. "Careful." He shrugs. "Just saying." Later that day, you see one of the nobleman's sons passing through. He's holding a small book, not scripture, something else. He flips pages casually, like they're leaves, and you feel a pang of something unfamiliar. Not envy. Hunger. You think about the saints again, how they're always shown with scrolls and glowing tomes and paintings. And here you are, scratching letters in dirt with a stick and hoping no one laughs. Quirky anecdote. There's a tale about a peasant who memorized every sermon he heard for 20 years and tried to rebuild the Bible from memory. It ended up being mostly parables and chickens. The church was not amused. You spend the evening watching your daughter play with a piece of bark she calls a book. She holds it reverently, reads aloud in gibberish, then blesses the goat. You laugh, but quietly. It's hard to be told that knowledge is holy, yet denied the tools to grasp it. The priest says, you don't need to read, that listening is enough, that faith comes through the ear, not the eye. But sometimes you wonder what's really on those pages. Does God sound angry? Gentle? Does he mention peasants at all? You lie awake that night, imagining letters dancing in firelight, curled ink symbols you can't understand, whispering secrets you'll never hear, words locked behind language, chained to altars, spoken only by men who never sweat in fields or bury children in frozen soil. You whisper the Lord's Prayer to yourself. It's the only one you know by heart. The rhythm is soothing, the words familiar. But even as your lips move, your mind drifts to pages, to truths you'll never see. The wind has shifted. You feel it in your bones. Not a storm. Something quieter, quicker, like the air holding its breath before a whisper. You step outside and glance at the chapel. No bell, no sermon, just a stillness, heavy and strange. In your pocket, you carry something old, a tiny charm made of bone and string. It belonged to your grandmother. She used to say it kept away the night spirits. You never told the priest. You never will. Because today, you need it. You feel it. Something moving in the village. Not a person. Not exactly. An unease. A flicker of rebellion. Not loud, not open, but real. Your neighbor, Anselm, doesn't bow his head during Mass anymore. You noticed. So did Father Ulrich. Oswin skips confession. He says he's too busy. No one calls him out. Even you, just last night, you forgot to say grace, on purpose. Faith and fear, braided like rope, have held your world together since before you could walk. But the threads are fraying. Historians still wonder how common it was for medieval peasants to keep one foot in older pre-Christian beliefs. The evidence is everywhere. Pagan charms hidden in walls, prayers said at crossroads, saints that sound suspiciously like older gods in disguise. And here you are, fingers wrapped around a pagan trinket while a wooden crucifix hangs on your wall. Two gods, perhaps, or one who changes names. You walk past the chapel and into the woods. The path is worn, but not by pilgrims, by villagers, quiet ones. You follow it to a clearing where an old oak tree splits the sky. Beneath it, tucked in a hollow, is a bundle of offerings: bread, herbs, and a small carved figure, weathered by rain, faceless. You add your own. Just a bit of salt. No one speaks here. But the silence feels full. Quirky practice? In some villages, midwives still muttered ancient blessings over newborns that never appeared in any church book. They marked babies with soot to confuse evil spirits. And if a child sickened before baptism, they whispered old names to call the soul back, just in case. You return home to find your spouse lighting candles, not for the saints, but for everyone. Family, the fields, the goat, even the tree. Later that night, you tuck the charm beneath your child's pillow. They sleep soundly. The wind has calmed. For now, you still go to church. You still cross yourself. But in your heart, something has shifted. Not a loss of faith. No, a redistribution. A quiet rebalancing between what you're told and what you feel. You mutter your prayers by rote, and then softly, in a language no priest taught you, you whisper another. One your grandmother knew, one the earth understands. And now, the fire is low. The wind outside hums gently against the eaves, no longer threatening, just present, like an old lullaby. The rain has stopped, or maybe it never came. You're not sure. Time feels soft now, like wool soaked in warm water. The chapel bell doesn't ring tonight. No sermons echo, just the crackle of coals and the rhythmic breath of sleeping children. The village has folded in on itself, tucked beneath blankets and thatch and silence. You lie back on your straw pallet, joints sighing with relief. The aches, the guilt, the constant rhythm of bow, pray, confess, all of it fades, just for a little while. Outside, the moon peeks between clouds. You watch its pale light dance on the wooden beams above you, slow and steady, like the passage of something ancient. Your hands are still calloused, your back still bent, but your spirit, tonight, is still. Not saved, not judged, simply yours. You close your eyes. Maybe tomorrow the tithe will sting. Maybe the church will come knocking with a list of sins you forgot to commit. Maybe there will be storms, or sermons, or suspicion. But not now. Now, the world is soft and slow, and sleep waits, patient and kind. So let your breath ease. Let your muscles uncoil. Let your thoughts drift into forest paths and glowing angels and old songs whispered under oak trees. The story is done. You are safe. You are quiet, and the night is long.